Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Our week is progressing. It is Wednesday, and it's nice to see you, Lindsay.
It's nice to see you, too. I also got to see my baby Kinsley yesterday after 2 weeks of being in Qatar.
Oh, my goodness.
It was so nice to be reunited. We just hugged for like 20 minutes straight and watched show. She did my makeup. She has like a fake little makeup kit. So can you tell?
I cannot tell. So Kinsley and Colin did not go with you to Qatar.
They didn't.
Sometimes they come with you on your adventures.
Yeah, but this one was for News Nation. It was more of a docuseries instead of our travel show. I did try to push it so that they can come, but wasn't in the cars this time. Hopefully next time. I did miss them a lot. Coming up on Rising, President Trump snapped at an ABC reporter during an Oval Office press conference yesterday, and he even threatened to pull the network's license.
Plus, a group of Democrats released a video on X urging military and intelligence community members to defy illegal orders, prompting conservatives to accuse them of calling for an insurrection.
And Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has been criticizing her own party and feuding with President Trump as of late, but she's now taking aim at Fox News. But first, Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, the Trump administration signaled yesterday that it was moving forward on one of President Trump's key election promises, shutting down the Department of Education. As someone who has advocated for this outcome for many, many years, I'm personally thrilled it's finally coming to this. Now, the administration announced that the department's core functions would be handed off to other agencies in anticipation of finally closing down the building itself. Actually abolishing the Education Department would take an act of Congress, though the Supreme Court has okayed Trump's move to fire many of the department's bureaucrats, which is a good start. Frankly, it's astonishing to me that this is actually happening. Republicans have been promising to shut down the Education Department for 50 years. Ronald Reagan ran on ending it in 1980, a decade before I was even born. Every Republican president and most presidential candidates similarly vowed to shut it down, but then never took up the issue again when they had the chance to do so. The Trump administration is keenly aware of this. Yesterday, the Education Department's X account posted an unusually honest video about GOP achievements on this front to date, or lack thereof. Take a look.
I would like to dissolve the $10 billion National Department of Education created by President Carter.
But better education doesn't mean a bigger Department of Education. In fact, that department should be abolished.
I can assure you that teachers don't want to waste their time making their way through a maze of regulations.
That's not all. The video continues.
We have to literally erase the board and rethink from the ground up.
There's no authority for the federal government to be involved in education.
My administration will take all lawful steps to shut down the department. We're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible.
Now, if the day has finally come that a Republican administration is serious about fulfilling its promises and shutting down an unnecessary federal bureaucracy, then great. I want to be clear, however, that we should not merely shuffle all the existing functions of the department to other agencies. We should eliminate unnecessary, counterproductive, and, yes, unconstitutional interference from the federal government into the state's education policies. Closing the Department of Education is one of those ideas that really spooks liberal Democrats, even though it's far less radical an idea than they are willing to admit or consider. For starters, the department is simply unconstitutional. The Constitution does not grant the federal government any power to regulate education. That's reason enough in my book to close it down. Furthermore, the department doesn't actually do what it appears to do. It doesn't employ any teachers, it doesn't manage any classrooms, and it doesn't interact with students in any direct way. What it does is oversee grant money. For K-12, federal spending on education is small. It's only about 10% or less of what schools receive. Most of the money from K-12 schools, that comes from the states themselves. We certainly don't need a sprawling federal bureaucracy just to administer such a paltry sum of money. Now, the Department of Education does play a much larger role in the funding of higher education, in that the department oversees the student loan program, the federal program. That program needs to be scrapped anyway. We have now ample evidence that subsidizing student loans at the federal level is causing runaway tuition inflation and saddling thousands or millions of Americans with unsustainable levels of debt. We need to get rid of it now. After all, as Education Secretary Linda McMahon pointed out, Most of the department was offline during the shutdown, the government shutdown, and we hardly noticed. Schools kept running all across the country.
The federal Department of Education furloughed 90% of its staff. And what happened? Nothing. Schools stayed open. Students went to class. Teachers got paid. The shutdown proved our schools don't depend on Washington bureaucracy to function.
Yeah, she makes a good point. So why do we need it? We don't. And I'm for shutting it down immediately, Lindsay. Say goodbye to the Department of Education.
I'm against it. I think the reason why we saw so many years go past where you see Republicans coming to the forefront and making it, a big claim about shutting it down and it never happening is because most of the country is against it. And so when kids become political capital or collateral, that's a big problem for me. Also, it's a big problem for the country. The Wall Street Journal said that 61% of voters actually oppose dismantling the Department of Education, and similar majorities also support prioritizing education and the Department of Education over funding tax cuts, which is where a lot of this extra free money possibly might go if we start to dismantle and gather funds. And so I think, according to the National Education Association, there's a lot of negative impacts that this will have. You're calling this small, minute amount that the federal government gives to local schools something that's irrelevant, but it's certainly not. I think the vast majority of kids go to public schools. We're talking about 90% of students in the country.
Yeah, but we're not going to close any public schools. It's
I know,
just,
but they're going to lose. If it's 10% of that funding, it's still a significant amount of funding that we need to be overviewing. They're going to have that fund.
No, they're not getting rid of that funding. They're just going to have it administered by the Department of Labor.
According to people who studied this and spend a lot of time, people with kids with disabilities, they could be people that suffer the most. 95% of students that have disabilities go to public schools. So without federal oversight and funding, then these kids won't get the services, equipment, or some of the things that 10% of irrelevant funding you're talking about goes to. Class sizes might also explode, which would be a problem and a huge loss for teachers. Programs that pay for reading specialists, smaller class sizes, and high poverty areas provide support in those ways.
Well, they're not getting rid of those programs. They're just going to have them administered by
shuffling them around so that it's all unorganized. And then you're suggesting that they go further and don't even shuffle them, just straight up cut them.
I would straight up cut them.
But these will affect students. So that's what I'm saying. It also could possibly weaken protection against discrimination. So the Department of Education also has a job to enforce rules that protect kids from any discrimination in the classroom. Would you like to open the door for no oversight in that? And so there are a lot of things that that kids should be discriminated against.
Federal efforts to prohibit or protect or stop discrimination in schools have been disastrous. Under Obama, the Education Department sent guidance to K-12 schools that they had to be careful of disparate disciplinary actions on students. And so schools got spooked that they were going to lose federal funding if they disciplined kids, and it seemed that there was some racial discrepancy. But of course, because
does anybody care about the student that's disciplined because of racial discrepancy and then ends up in a pipeline that's not the best life for them?
Well, yeah.
Like, this is relevant too.
This is exactly why we're shutting that down. That's holding back the entire classroom when you can't discipline badly behaved kids.
Okay, just eating though. Like, the Department of Education also helps with free meals and funding of those free meals and
where in the
services
Constitution
for
does
schools.
It say that the federal government should provide meals?
You want more kids or less kids to be fed? I mean, we're literally in a time right now where a lot of people are still reeling. Yeah, that's what you're looking forward to by having less meal programs in school. Like, there are people who actually rely on those, who won't eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner without those. There's people who are relying on SNAP benefits, and the government has been shut down, and they're going to school and looking for that first meal when their parents didn't cook last night. But you're so worried about giving money to tax cuts, or where do you want that money to go?
There's no federal authority
oversight
to have that program.
Programs.
The states can.
But you're on an island with this. 60% of Americans, according to the Wall Street Journal, which is hardly a liberal website, says that Americans would like to keep the Department of Education.
60% of Americans say we'd like to abolish the First Amendment. It wouldn't make it.
Who is the president doing this for, though? No one's calling. He can focus on so much that's bothering people right now. Right? Americans are largely uncomfortable with their finances.
He's doing it for
There's so
families
much that he can do.
and for
but families
students
aren't asking
and
for this. That's why I'm confused about
policy,
as somebody that has a child in school. It's just like, who's asking for this? No parents are coming to the table. There's no policy, though. All he's saying is, let's abolish it, and I'm getting it done. What are the next steps? That's always been my problem with the administration. They throw out these blanket statements and then leave it in disarray. That was my problem with Doge. Sure, we can cut, but you left everything in disarray with no plan or way forward. And that's why some things stuck, some things didn't stuck.
Well, we're not addressing the main thing that the Education Department does, because this is a small amount of money when we're talking about K through 12, is administer a federal student loans program that correlates, statistically has been shown to correlate with spiraling out of control higher education costs. We just desperately need to change this program. People are finishing college with massive levels of debt, and then they can't get jobs to pay off that debt. It's all due to the federal government subsidizing it. It's all due to this program. That is what their main role is, to oversee that program that is ruinous for people of our generation and people who are younger.
But colleges will still get more expensive. So with a lack of...
They've gotten more expensive in direct proportion to how much subsidized student loans there are.
With a lack of next steps, with a lack of plan, and just suggesting that we should cut the federal government, which supplies 30% of college student loans, I think that we need to be considerate that people, if 30% of students rely on that, what we're going to do instead.
But we're not doing that.
Because people cannot get these loans.
We're tricking them. They're tricks.
I don't like the student loan system either. That's why they're being forgiven. I just think that if there's nothing in its place, then people can't go to school.
That we have
Who
to
can
forgive
afford
them.
school?
Isn't that a admission that this is a bad program?
If it's a bad, but what's the next step?
Years later, we have to
so
contemplate having to just
do this
forgive
thing
the
where
debt.
they push an idea forward but have no solution to it. So
the solution is
canceling
to end the bad idea.
And then what? How do kids get to college? How do kids afford college? Is what I'm asking.
College tuition was affordable. You could work and afford it.
Tell me how they afford
40 years
right
ago
now.
before we started
Okay,
this
you're talking
program.
about ancient history. You want to abolish the way that kids get into school. They don't have a lot of money. So how do they afford college now that they cut all the federal programs that provide Pell Grants?
The price of tuition would be cheaper if the government was not encouraging the schools to raise rates.
So no plan then.
No. If we're talking about public universities, the University of Michigan is a public university. That's where I went, in the state of Michigan. The government of the state of Michigan could order the school to lower its tuition prices so that the residents of the state can afford to go there. I'd be all for that.
That would require coordination from
I'm all for that.
Federal programs
I'm all for government schools
governments.
to be ordered by the government. Schools can be administered by the government, and they should make them cheaper. I agree with that.
President Trump is snapping at a reporter in the Oval Office. That was yesterday in front of the Saudi Crown Prince. What he said, coming up next. We'll be right back.